The year is 1857, West Texas. The kind of heat that makes the horizon shimmer like water that'll never come. A column of dust rises from the desert floor, not from horses, not from mules, from something else, something that shouldn't be here. A camel, tall and patient, its shadow stretching long across the sand. Behind it, another, and another. A man in a cavalry uniform sits atop the lead animal, squinting into the glare, wondering if this is genius or if he's about to become the punchline of every barroom joke from San Antonio to Santa Fe. He has no idea he's both. Let's back up 2 years. It's 1855, and the United States Army has a problem. The Southwest is vast, hostile, and thirsty. Supply lines stretch thin. Horses and mules need water every day or two. They're expensive to feed, expensive to replace, and they die in the heat like they've got a personal vendetta against the desert. Someone in Washington, specifically Jefferson Davis, the Secretary of War, looked at this problem and thought, what if we didn't use horses at all? What if we used camels? Now, before you laugh, understand that Davis wasn't crazy. He was actually thinking like a logistics officer. Camels can go 8 days without water. They can carry 300 pounds or more. They don't mind the heat. They're built for exactly this kind of country. So in March 1855, Congress appropriated $30,000, a real sum of money back then, and Davis sent 2 officers, Lieutenant Edward Beale of the Navy and Major Henry C. Wayne of the Army, to Egypt and Tunisia to buy camels, actual camels, for the actual United States military. The fact that this seemed like a reasonable idea to a sitting Secretary of War tells you something about how desperate the Army was, or how optimistic, probably both. On May 14, 1856, the USS Supply pulled into Indianola, Texas, with 33 camels in its hold, dromedaries and Bactrians, real animals, real smell. The locals had never seen anything like it. The Army established Camp Verde, about 60 miles north of San Antonio, as the headquarters for what would become the United States Camel Corps. By February 1857, a second shipment arrived, 41 more camels, 70 animals total. The experiment was officially underway. And here's the thing. It worked. Lieutenant Beale took a detachment of camel cavalry and set out to map a wagon road from Fort Defiance, New Mexico to the Colorado River in California. This was 1855 to 1858. Rough country, unforgiving, the kind of terrain where horses quit and mules get stubborn. The camels handled it. They carried the supplies, they covered the distance, they proved in the most practical way possible that the whole idea wasn't just theoretically sound, it actually worked. Beale's expedition succeeded. The Beale wagon road got mapped. The camels got the job done. By every measure that mattered to a logistics officer, the Camel Corps was a success, which is exactly when everything fell apart. See, there's a difference between something working and something being acceptable. The cavalry didn't want camels, horses panicked at the smell of them, soldiers didn't want to be camel drivers. There was something undignified about it, something that didn't fit the image of the American cavalry officer. And the camels themselves, they were smelly, temperamental, hard to handle, and deeply, profoundly foreign. They didn't fit the culture. By 1860, the program was already losing support. Then the Civil War started, and suddenly the Army had bigger problems than whether camels could carry supplies across the desert. Funding dried up. The experiment that had seemed so promising just a few years earlier got quietly shelved. The camels were sold off, given away, or simply released into the wild. The Camel Corps, which had never actually fought a battle, was over. It lasted about 5 years, long enough to prove it could work, not long enough to change anyone's mind. Haji Ali, his real name was Haji Ali, a Greek-Syrian cameleer hired by Beale to manage the animals, stayed in the Southwest after the program ended. He became a legend, not because he was a soldier, but because he was the last living connection to something strange and impossible. When he died, they buried him in Quartzsite, Arizona, and marked his grave with a pyramid. It's still there. You can visit it. It's the only pyramid in Arizona, and it marks the grave of a man who drove camels for the United States Army. One camel, a female named Topsy, or sometimes Saeed, lived longer than anyone expected. She was captured and eventually ended up at Griffith Park Zoo in Los Angeles, where she lived until 1934. 78 years after the Camel Corps was disbanded, the last documented survivor of the experiment died in a zoo in California. But the strangest part, the feral descendants. Camels released into the Arizona and Nevada deserts didn't just disappear. They survived. They bred. For decades after the Civil War, there were reports of wild camels in the Southwest. Sightings continued into the 1940s.
How many there were, where they went, whether any survived past that. Nobody really knows. The records got fuzzy. The frontier always does. The U.S. Camel Corps is one of those stories that reminds you that good ideas don't always win. Sometimes they lose to culture. Sometimes they lose to timing. Sometimes they lose because a cavalry officer would rather his horse panic than admit that a camel might be better at the job. The camels were right. The logistics were sound. But the army wasn't ready, and history wasn't patient. By the time anyone figured out what they'd given up, it was too late. If forgotten corners of American military history are your kind of story, the next one's already saddled up. I'll see you down the trail.